In this chapter, we're going to be talking about motivation. Motivation is the set of forces that cause people to behave in certain ways. So managers have the goal of trying to maximize the behaviors we want to see, like our employees coming to work on time, putting in effort and meeting performance goals, and minimize undesirable behaviors such as coming late to work, slacking off, not doing their job. So motivation is very important in the workplace. Individual performance is determined by motivation, ability, and the work environment. So motivation is the desire to do the job, ability is their capability to do that job, and the work environment means we have the resources for people to do their job. So if there's something lacking in a person's ability, we can provide training. If the work environment is lacking, we can increase the resources so the person can do the job. But if a person is lacking in motivation, this is probably the hardest thing to try and remedy. So now let's look at some historical perspectives on motivation. So going back to chapter 2, we talked about this traditional approach, and we can look back to scientific management and Frederick Taylor. This is when we looked at workers as being interchangeable tools of production. The assumptions back then were that managers know more than workers, that money is the most important thing to motivate our workers, and that workers generally think of work as being an unpleasant experience. Scientific management was all about finding ways to improve the performance of the individual worker. Lots of experiments, finding the best way to do things for employees. And then we hit a turning point with the Hawthorne studies, which was a scientific experiment that was looking for the appropriate or best lighting level in a factory for performance. They tried all different levels of lighting, and what they found is motivation just kept going up until it couldn't go up anymore because they couldn't see properly, right? So we didn't expect that at all. And after interviewing people in the factory, they found out that the employees were just so excited to have someone paying attention to them that motivated them. The other thing they tried in the Hawthorne studies was a piece rate system where we were going to pay each person for the number of things they produced. So you would expect that people would produce to the best of their ability to earn as much money as possible, but that didn't happen either. What happened was the group decided collectively what would be an acceptable level, and that's what most of them produced. So with this shift from scientific to this human relations approach, we saw this first appreciation for people in the workplace and the emphasized role of social process. So the assumptions under this human relations approach were that, employees want to feel useful and important. Employees have strong social needs, and that's more important than money. And under this approach, maintaining the appearance of employee participation was important. So making people feel important, even if we're not really letting them participate. But as this approach to motivation and our employees continued to grow, we entered into this human resource approach, which actually started to emphasize the values of those employees to the organization. So under this approach, employee contributions are actually important and valuable to both the employee and the organization, that employees want to and are able to make genuine contributions, and that management job is to encourage this participation and create a work environment that motivates employees. Now that we have this backdrop, let's talk about the different motivation theories we're going to cover in this chapter. There are a lot of theories. These are the ones I'm going to test you on that you need to know. We are not going to distinguish between which of these are content, process, or reinforcement theories. All right, so we're going to work our way through each of these theories on the upcoming slides. Let's start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow believed that human needs could be classified into these different categories, and he believed that they fell into a hierarchy. So with this hierarchy, the first need that would have to be satisfied would be this first base level, which is physiological. All right, so physiological, so on this side we see an example. So things for living, so food, shelter. All right, so how can we meet those needs? That would be through pay, your base salary. The idea with this hierarchy of needs is that you need to know where a person is on this hierarchy to figure out how you can best motivate them. So if someone is at this level, then pay is probably going to be what satisfies them or motivates them. Then we move up. If your physiological needs are met, then the next thing would be your security needs, such as stability, which things like a pension plan, making sure you have adequate money in retirement, job security, those kinds of things would fall here. Once that's met, then you move up the hierarchy to wanting your belongingness or your social needs satisfied at work. So those are friendships, making sure you're getting along with the people at work. After that level, then your esteem needs would need to be met. So that has to do with status, telling you you're doing a great job. A way to do that would be a change in job title or getting some other kinds of rewards and recognitions. And lastly, at the very top of this needs hierarchy is self-actualization needs. These are the needs for achievement, to feel like you're doing things that are meaningful to you. So having a job that challenging in the idea of being something you want to do and want to accomplish, not just being difficult. So this seems pretty logical, but research has shown that there are some shortcomings and defects in this theory. And I think we'll see that with most of the theories. They're not going to be perfect in every situation. For instance, with Maslow's hierarchy, people from different cultures might have different needs and they might be in a different hierarchy. But in all of these theories, they might not work under every situation, and that's important to keep in mind, but these are different theories, and we're going to go through each of them. So the next one is the two-factor theory. This is by Hertzberg. With this theory, the idea is that satisfaction, which we talked about last chapter, and dissatisfaction are influenced by two different sets of factors. So instead of thinking of having satisfaction on one end of the spectrum and dissatisfaction on the other end of the spectrum, we're actually separating the two. So you'd have a range of satisfaction to no satisfaction, and you'd have dissatisfaction to no dissatisfaction. So the idea with this theory is that it assumes motivation is a two-step process. We have to make sure that the things that cause us dissatisfaction are not deficient. Okay? Those are the things in our work environment. We call those the hygiene factors. And then, once we've ensured that, then we try to motivate through the work content to give people the opportunity through job enrichment to motivate them. So it might be easier to look more visually at this theory. Okay, so this is what I mean. We have our motivation factors that can either give us satisfaction, or if they're lacking, we don't get satisfaction. But then the hygiene factors, this work environment, can either keep us from having dissatisfaction, so no dissatisfaction, or cause dissatisfaction. Okay, so again, the idea is that we want to make sure these are not dissatisfying us, and if we do that, then we can work on motivating people. So things like how much money you're making. If we're not making enough money, right, if we feel like we're inadequately paid, or our supervisor doesn't treat us right, we're going to be dissatisfied at work. And it is going to be near impossible, based on this theory, to actually motivate us, because these hygiene factors are holding that opportunity back. So first we want to make sure that these are all in line so that we're not dissatisfied. Then we can work on work content, feeling like the work we're doing is something we want to be doing. We have responsibility, a chance for advancement and growth. We get recognition for the work we're doing. Those are things that can motivate us. Research has also been done on these are the top 3 individual human needs. We have the need for achievement, the need for affiliation, and the need for power. So with the need for achievement, this has been widely studied. The need for achievement is about the desire to accomplish a goal or task more effectively than in the past. This assumes personal responsibility, and people with a high need for achievement set moderately difficult goals. So think about this. If I have a high need for achievement, I don't set very difficult goals because it might be harder for me to achieve them. This high need for achievement means I want to make sure I am achieving those goals. So my goals are moderately difficult. I desire specific feedback and immediate feedback. And this, in the United States, is estimated to represent about 10% of our population. So keep in mind that someone with a high need for achievement sets these moderately difficult goals, because we're going to revisit that in a later theory. The need for affiliation is less understood. It's similar to Maslow's belongingness need, which is the desire for human companionship and acceptance. People with a strong need for affiliation are going to prefer and probably perform better in a job that entails a lot of social interaction. Lastly, on these human needs, we have the need for power. This is the desire to be influential in a group and to be in control of one's environment. This has also been studied, and research has found that managers tend to have a stronger power motive than people in the general population. The theories we've covered thus far have looked at the factors in the workplace that can motivate people. Now we're going to shift and look at some theories that address how that motivation actually occurs. Let's start with expectancy theory. So with expectancy theory, motivation depends on how much we want something and how likely we think we are to get it. So perception plays a big part here. So let's break down the elements of this theory. First, we have the effort to performance expectancy. So does the employee perceive that if they work harder, it's going to lead to a higher level of performance? Next, we have the performance to outcome expectancy. So does the employee believe that the probability that that performance will lead to some specific outcome? And then when we talk about outcomes, we refer to valence. This is how much an individual values a particular outcome, how attractive that outcome is to the individual. So let's talk about being in a class. So in any class you're taking at the college, if the goal is an A, getting an A in the class, how much do you value getting an A? Provided you really want an A in a class, if you were to put in more effort, do you think you could increase your performance? That's the first piece. And the second is, will that performance be enough to actually get you the A? Now, if you have a cut and dry point system and you know exactly what you have to get that A, you might know with some certainty if it's possible for you to get that A. But in other classes where it might be a little more subjective, if you don't believe that if you put in more effort, you're going to do better, and if you don't believe that doing better will lead to that grade you want, you're not going to be motivated to work any harder. Okay? Another thing, getting an A in a class might not be someone's goal. Take a visiting student. Visiting student doesn't need an A. They only need a C for the credits to transfer back. The GPA isn't an issue. So they're not going to be as motivated, based on this theory, to work harder to get a higher grade because that A has no value to them. They don't need it. Okay, let's move on to equity theory. With equity theory, the word I want you to remember with this theory is fairness. So people are motivated to seek social equity or fairness in the rewards they receive for performance. Equity is the belief that the treatment is fair relative to the treatment of others. So with this theory, we look at ourselves and what we put in comparison to what we get out. So in a job, how much effort are we putting in? How much time, energy, our skills, our ability? And then what do we get out? Which would be the pay, the compensation, the benefits, the perks. We compare ourselves to some other person in the organization. We look at what we perceive. Again, perception is important here. What we perceive are their inputs and their outcomes. We might not know what they make, but we might see that maybe we see that they work so many more hours than we do, or they're always there, or that they're not always there. If after this comparison we feel that we're being equitably rewarded, we're going to maintain our performance. But if we feel under-rewarded, we are going to try and reduce that inequity. That can take different forms. We might increase or decrease our inputs, which means we'd either try harder or slack off. So if I compare myself to someone and I feel like I work as hard as they do, I perform as well as they do, yet I see that they are treated better. Maybe they get better time off, they get higher pay, they get other things. I might reduce my inputs, slack off a bit so that I feel like it's more fair. I might change my outcomes. I might say, you know what, I'm going to ask for a raise because I am doing the same amount of work or more work than the person I'm comparing to, and I should be paid more. I could distort the ratios by altering how I see my inputs and outputs in comparison to others, and that'll make me feel better. Right? Maybe I decide, you know what, they work a lot more hours than me, so it feels fairer. I might quit. If I'm that upset about the inequity, I might just leave that job. And the other thing I might do is change who I compare myself to. Maybe the person I'm comparing myself to has been there 30 years or more. So they've kind of earned a little bit in terms of respect in the workplace. They certainly make more because they've been there so much longer. So maybe I should be comparing myself to someone else. We can also feel like there's inequity if we feel we're being over-rewarded. And the same thing here. We might distort our ratios, increase or decrease inputs, or help the person we're comparing ourselves to gain more outcomes for themselves. Okay, so perhaps we're favored for some reason and we see that someone else in the workplace that we're comparing ourselves to is not treated as favorably. It might make us feel bad. So we might decrease our or increase our inputs so that we feel like, all right, I'm actually doing more and that's why I get more. Okay, so equity theory is all about fairness, and these are some of the outcomes we might see if an employee feels that they are not being treated fairly. So this is something to be aware of as a manager so that we can try to address it if we think there is a perception of inequity. Let's move on to goal setting theory. So the nutshell on this one is that setting goals influence the behavior of people in organizations. So we've talked about goals in other chapters, and goals do help to motivate. Under this theory, we have four different characteristics of these goals. The goals need to be difficult. So the goals should be challenging and require effort because people will work harder to achieve more difficult goals. They need to be difficult but attainable. So this differs from the human needs approach when we talk about the need for achievement. With the need for achievement, people want moderately difficult goals. With this theory, the more difficult the goal, the more it will motivate. But it can't be so difficult or perceived to be so difficult that it's not attainable. We also look at goal specificity, the word I can never say. This is how clear and precise the goal is. When we talk about SMART goals in previous chapters, it needs to be specific. Otherwise, how can a very vague goal motivate behavior? We don't even know what we're supposed to accomplish. So it needs to be precise. We need to know what we're supposed to do in order to reach this goal. Goals will vary in their ability to be stated specifically. For instance, we can say you need to sell X number of an item in order to meet your goal. If we have the goal of increasing customer satisfaction, that's going to be a little harder to be specific about. So how do we increase customer satisfaction? We might need to create some sort of survey. Next, we have goal acceptance, which is the extent to which persons accept a goal as their own. And lastly, we have goal commitment, the extent to which an individual is personally interested in reaching a goal. Both goal acceptance and commitment can be increased if we start getting our employees to participate in the goal setting. If we set the goals for our employees, they might not accept or be as committed to them as if they were involved in actually setting those goals. The last theory we have in this chapter is reinforcement theory, where behavior is a function of its consequences. If we use positive reinforcement, we would be strengthening behavior with some sort of reward or positive outcome after the desired behavior is performed. If you do a great job on a project, you might be rewarded with a bonus. That's positive reinforcement. Avoidance is another way to strengthen the behavior we want to see, but instead it's by people avoiding the unpleasant consequence that would result if you didn't perform the behavior. We can use my late policy that I have in my live classroom as an example. If a student is late for class, they have to wait outside the classroom until I wave them in. I explain that being late is an interruption to class and is disruptive to students and also to my train of thought. They may have to wait 2 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, but it's proven to be pretty effective. It's just uncomfortable enough for students to not want to have to experience it. Punishment and extinction are used to weaken the undesirable behavior of our employees. Punishment should be avoided because it can cause resentment. However, sometimes behavior is dangerous or illegal and needs to be stopped immediately. So, regarding being late to class, I could take points off your final grade. In the workplace, if someone is doing something illegal, the ultimate punishment or consequence would be firing them. But consider something like a police officer doing something wrong. They could be suspended without pay. This sends a clear signal that the behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Now, lastly, let's look at extinction. Basically, with this method, the idea is if I ignore it, it will go away. I use this when I have students that want to comment on every item I say. By raising their hands, then I can select the students that comment. I will call on them once in a while, but not every time. Over time, the student learns to only raise their hand when they have something they really want to contribute. So under reinforcement theory, positive reinforcement is the best approach. It strengthens the behavior we want to see. The worst approach would be punishment. Again, this should only be used in extreme circumstances. Now there's positive reinforcement can backfire, and I want to give you a couple examples of that. Suppose someone makes an inappropriate joke and you nervously laugh because it catches you off guard. The joke teller may take that as positive reinforcement and continue that behavior. It was not your intent to reward that behavior. And I can give you another example of how I've ruined my dog with positive reinforcement. My dog barks like crazy when someone comes over our house. I want her to be quiet, and I end up giving her a biscuit because she can't bark with a biscuit in her mouth. But I've just rewarded bad behavior. So now when someone comes over, she barks until she gets the biscuit. Reinforcement theory is helpful when we're looking to modify workplace behavior. By applying the basic elements of this theory in an organizational setting, we can change the behavior of our employees. By consistently applying reinforcement, we help maintain employee motivation by encouraging those positive behaviors and discouraging any of the dysfunctional behaviors we see in our organization. Now let's just touch on some popular motivational strategies, such as empowerment, where we enable our workers to set their own work goals, make some decisions, and solve problems within their sphere of influence. Participation, we've already talked about this a couple times. Giving employees a voice in making decisions about their work and letting them participate in different areas, decisions about their jobs, administrative matters, and also broader issues such as product quality, perhaps setting their schedules. And then alternative work arrangements. such as having a compressed work week, which is taking 40 hours instead of spreading it over 5 days, we get it into 4 days. Flex time, where you have some flexibility in terms of your scheduling of your day. It doesn't mean you can come and go as you please, but it means that maybe instead of coming in the traditional 9 to 5, you come in 7 to 3. Job sharing, instead of working full time, maybe your job is broken up with another person. And then also telecommuting, being able to work from home. These alternative work arrangements can be motivating because it might be something that really makes a difference in someone being able to balance work and life. Lastly, we're going to just touch on reward systems to motivate. A merit reward system bases a meaningful portion of an individual's compensation on merit. So employees who make greater contributions are given higher pay than those who make lesser contributions. We also have incentive reward systems, such as a piece rate system, where you're paid for each piece you complete, and also sales commissions. There are other forms of incentives that companies offer, such as non-monetary incentives. We refer to these as perks.